But again, back to the truth thing. If they run a bill that says that any history taught in Oklahoma schools must be accurate, I don't think you would get any pushback. You wouldn't get
Yeah.
any put. The 1619 project is accurate. You talked about Daniel Pay. He's of Asian descent. I'm not, I'm not sure what country. I do know that we had camps right here for Asians during World War. We had internment camps during World War II. We had substantial abuse of Asian folks in California during the building of the railroad. We criminalized heroin to criminalize Asian folks. Um, and now we have the Asian hate. History is deemed to repeat itself. I would like to think that we are intelligent enough that if there was more study done on the Japanese internment camps, it would be less likely that you could commit an act of hatred against an Asian American if you understood how Chinese people were treated historically in this country, especially in California with the railroads and the criminalization of heroin and opioids, just because they happened to be doing it at that point.
Well, and
And
our
so that
first
was a
immigration act was the Page Act, which was
Right.
absolutely against Chinese immigrants. Like that
yeah,
was our
Chinese.
first federal immigration
Well, and
act.
the enforcement of ICE today
Yeah.
is, I mean, ICE isn't picking up Australian or Canadian immigrants; it's picking up Hispanic immigrants. Like ICE is only used to go after people of color because that it's a racialized system of oppression that serves no purpose except to terrorize people of color and get mad about paperwork and administrative stuff. And to respond to a comment on Facebook, I'd like to know the legislature's plan to recognize and commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. They're asking Stitt to veto this because he sits on the Race Massacre Committee. Feels like a mixed bag at this point. If we can't even fucking learn about this shit, how the hell are you going to commemorate the 100th anniversary of a massacre if you're not allowed to, teach it that a bunch of white people murdered a bunch of black people?
I'll just say this pertaining to understand the value in understanding and learning just the truth. Again, I don't know where all this indoctrination comes from. Like black women were really being raped. I mean, you take that how you want to take it, but like it
I
was
mean,
just happening.
didn't lynchings peak in the early 20th century? I mean, it was in the 1930s, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
like the first 10 years of like the 19th century. I want to say like 1907
Okay,
or like
okay.
that was peaking. But no, it was happening.
I mean, it happened all the way to the
well,
80s.
Yeah, James Byrd was like 90s, which by the way, my family, both sides of my family come out of East Texas. I was born and raised in Hugo. But I just remember what James Byrd happened, me being a kid, being one of my early memories. Again, how children are influenced and understand these things. Whenever James Byrd was lynched in the late 90s in East Texas, my family comes from both sides of my family come basically from Paris and that part of the world. Got some families live in like Houston. We all up down through East Texas. So cousins, they drive up and down, right? Like they are aware of Jasper and James Byrd and that part of the world. Like it's a known thing. And they reiterated that me as a kid watching them. I just remember them saying, you have to be careful when you're driving up and down that part of the world. You got to watch yourself. You can't stop at certain spots. I don't remember shock. I remember sorrow. I don't remember shock. But that to say, right, about you got Byrd, and the Anti-Hate Act is like Byrd and Matthew Shepard, the gay gentleman who was essentially lynched, right, um, in this country around the same time. And that is why understanding this is important. If I'm going to make a complete self-preservation argument with you, it's important to acknowledge and understand these things because oppression does not stop, it evolves. And we talked about the Chinese immigrants, we talked about black folks, we talked about ICE and ICE and immigration enforcement. Now I'll give you an example. And this example I always give folks because it hit hard right here in Oklahoma. And I practiced law. My first job, for whatever reason, I gave up all of the money and moved to the west side of Chicago, North Lawndale. Lived in low income housing, worked helping youths, um, defending youths in criminal courts. And so that community lost 75% of its jobs in the 70s, mainly because of Sears and Roebuck. Sears and Roebuck was there on the west side of Chicago, moved to the suburbs. A guy named William Julius Wilson wrote When Work Disappears. That's like if I have like an intellectual guidepost kind of book, it's William Julius Wilson, When Work Disappears. He was saying like work is leaving these Black communities. And since work is leaving these Black communities, there is a harmful effect on the social systems that we count on to maintain safe and viable neighborhoods. The people who have the means are going to move and follow the work. The people who cannot, they don't have means. They don't have, there aren't block clubs. There aren't church, like whatever the social fabric, right? When work disappears, there's a destruction of the social fabric. That's work in the American context and American system, broader, conversations about how we value work and how work should be done, et cetera, in the system is a conversation for another day. But just how work in the context of American work, when work disappears, there is a disintegration of the social networks and social fabrics that make safe and viable communities. Everyone was like, shut the fuck up, William Julius Wilson. We're going to build prisons. And so, because Black people clearly have these pathologies that make them do these things, fuck some work. And so you have the crack boom of the 80s. You have this explosion of mass incarceration, right? Everybody like, fuck William Julius Wilson. There was no attempt to acknowledge and understand the history of racism in these communities and how that affects the loss of work and how that affects these people who are suffering in these communities. Well, what do you know? You get some really bad policies from the federal government, and jobs start leaving white folks' neighborhoods. They if you look at the amount of manufacturing jobs in the Midwest and how they were completely decimated. And then the Great Recession, I don't want to say finished off the job, but it did a real good number on it. And so what do you get? Just like when on the west side of Chicago in the 70s, after the 80s, after work left, when Black folks did not know how to deal with this, right? And so you get drugs and an increase in crime and all of these things after work disappeared. Well, if we had acknowledged the truth of what led to that, of the racism, of who we are as a country, maybe we could have at least stopped it or addressed it. And then whenever there was the time to sign NAFTA, we could have said, you know what? We acknowledge and know the truth about what happened on places like the west side of Chicago, east side of Detroit. We shouldn't sign this because then it's going to be white folks in rural Ohio. They're going to be out of work too. But we did not do that. And so that oppression evolved. And you get this explosion in opioids that's killing disproportionately white people. Right. Reasons are rather racist too. But the point of the point of saying all of that is to say, when you acknowledge the truth, right? When you understand history, you can avoid it repeating itself. And oppression being one component that's going to try its damnedest to stay along with us as a society, understanding and acknowledging is how we stamp out oppression, because oppression will not stop unless we stomp it out. It will evolve, and it could evolve to you. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would argue that it has, and it did even 100 years ago. I mean, the way you frame that is just so coherent as far as my very math brained response to a lot of these social problems is it is explicitly in middle, lower, even some wealthier white folks' interest to address systemic racism. It is materially in our interest to create massive, well-paying jobs programs in underserved communities. It is in our interest to invest in their housing and healthcare and education. It is in our interest to do these things. It is worth it for me to pay more in taxes to see, them get helped or help poor white folks. I mean, to me, I think I really am personally very persuaded by the argument that racism really hurts white people tremendously, especially on a numeric level. Maybe the people at the very top pay less taxes and somehow get some marginal benefit out of it, which I'm very skeptical of. But I mean, for the majority of us who are in the working class, fucking over Black people definitely does not help us.
And bringing this full circle, that is why culture wars exist. You just said it. What you just said would be a huge boom for not just Black folks, not just brown folks, but poor white folks, but it would not be a boon to the plutocratic class. And so how do you avoid that solidarity? You do it with these culture wars, and that's
But,
why
like,
we're
man,
having
I
this
mean,
discussion.
But like, what the fuck are the plutocrats even doing now? I mean, it's like Jeff Bezos and like Elon Musk are like just shooting penis rockets into space. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's gone so far beyond. Like, they own like 40 companies each, and you know now they're getting like $100 billion divorces. I mean, fucking Bill Gates, you know, like yesterday. It's like, what? Why? Like, what are they doing with that money? Like, why do they need this much money? Like, I mean, it's so far beyond like any rational sense of like, and even if it's arguably any good for them, I mean, I don't see it. But
it's all socially better for them. Is
yeah,
like
I
one point that like
guess.
history makes, is like one of the main reasons, because if you look at it, you're like, it shouldn't matter mathematically if this person is white, this person is black, or whatever ideation, if they're on the same socioeconomic level. However, racism allows for poor white Americans to feel elevated. It allows them to feel like they are in a place above, that even though they are in the same socioeconomical class, even if they're below the same socioeconomic class as some people of color, it allows them to feel higher. It raises them up. And so that's something that like goes back like all the way back to Washington. Like there were rebellions that were poor white farmers and poor free blacks, and they would like work together, and then Washington was like, whoa, 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 actually this can be a problem. And so he supplied poor white farmers with more guns. He promoted them to be like militia members and gave them all of this rank just based on race, and told them to control the enslaved population, because it made them feel better about themselves. Like it's
Yeah.
all about like self-promotion, and that even though you work at McDonald's or whatever, you still feel like you're higher than people.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Like, you can't pay the rent with that shit. Like, you know, you can't.
Listen, man, I tell people all the time. I'm from Hugo, Oklahoma. The white folks broke too. Black folks just a little broker. Everyone's broke. Like it's not. I mean, at a point in time, I guess it was not. I guess I know it was this when they were segregated schools. But around this state, like you know, the white kids go to school 4 days a week too. Like you do know that. Like you are aware.
Drive through these rural towns. I mean, like I read census statistics a lot, so I mean, I generally know who lives where in this state for political, you know, campaign reasons. I mean, I drive through a lot of towns in rural Oklahoma. I'm like, ain't nobody moving their company here. Like, I mean, you know, like the entire downtown is crumbling. Every house you drive by is crumbling. Every street you drive on is crumbling. I mean, it's like, you know, somebody's not setting up their brand new shiny factory in your, you know, methed out, destroyed neighborhood. So maybe you should get off this other bullshit and get on to, you know, fixing some of this.